Welcome. Welcome to all of you who are joining me for the first time, and welcome back to those of you who have joined us before. Today's topic is the 5 stealth skills of successful analytic translators. And what I mean by stealth is it's the things that you don't notice that people do. It's those things that maybe you have a feeling they're doing something different, but you can't really tell. So let's talk about why we're here. Well, as we've talked about before, there are big failures in big data analytics. 90% of machine learning projects fail. We hear that only 1 in 10 or sometimes 1 in 5 projects actually make it into business production. So the failure rate is way too high. And the reasons get identified are not that we don't have technology or that we don't have talent. It's that the data team is siloed and separate from business, that there isn't an alignment in goals and priorities between business and IT and data science, and that what ends up happening is we pick problems to investigate as data scientists that are disconnected from what the priorities of the business actually are. So when we think about how far apart business and analytics teams are, it's important to realize that 2/3 of business team and 2/3 of analytic team members are frustrated, dissatisfied, and uncertain about how to interact with each other. There is a huge gap that we don't know how to cross. So today we're going to talk about why analytic translators might be able to rescue us by talking about their main goals and then the 5 stealth skills. To remind us, analytic translators, they have the goal to recognize and highlight opportunities where data and analytics can help solve key business problems, to facilitate analytic projects that meet business needs as efficiently and effectively as possible, avoiding and minimizing rework, delivering analytic results in optimal language formatted for a specific audience, and to do this while building strong relationships between business and analytic teams so that they develop an appreciation and respect for each other. Most of these skills are covered in the book Become an Analytic Translator, but a lot of them also rely on an earlier book that I co-wrote with my mentor, Dr. Clydette DeGroat, Get to What Matters, which highlights very specific tools that you can use in order to communicate more effectively. So what do analytic translators do differently? Well, the first one that you don't see is how they prepare. They will be thinking about something different than most business meetings might cover. So of course, when you come to a meeting, you have an agenda, but an analytic translator will also have an intention, and that intention will be a deliberate choice about how they want people to feel. What is the sentiment you want people to leave with? How do we want people to approach this meeting, and how do we want them to walk away feeling? Secondly, of course, you come to a meeting and you have a list of content that you want to cover, but analytic translators think about the context. They want to remind people why they're here. What is the main issue that we're addressing? What are the realities that we're facing? So that people feel reoriented to what it is that they need to think about in this meeting. Thirdly, of course, you come to a meeting with goals, but an analytic translator will also address concerns that we know are present. We show empathy that maybe the timeline is tight, or maybe people are worried about what the outcome might be. So we explicitly describe what matters to each team. And then lastly, we usually come to a meeting hoping to get consensus if we've informed people about something. But we also want to show appreciation so that we are building awareness of each other's value. So this may seem like a lot, but I might do this in, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, just thinking through them so that I can mention the context, the concerns, appreciation. So we're not talking about adding a long time to a meeting, just understanding and showing that we relate to what each team is going through. So that's number 1. Analytic translators prepare differently. So let's remind ourselves about the process that we go through when we have a project. That project looks sort of like this. We have a business environment at the top. We have the analytic environment at the bottom. And most projects start with a request of an identified problem from business. That request gets thrown over the proverbial fence over to the analysts who create a design, do an analysis, package up the results, and send it back over the fence to the business environment. Well, that's the process that we normally go through. The problem is that there are big gaps in understanding by the business team about what the analysts can do or what data are available, by the analytic team about what the priorities are for the business. So we often have these gaps. So when we're thinking about handoffs between the two teams, that's where we can have things go wrong. So let's talk about that first handoff at the beginning from business to the analytic team. It is very, very common that the rework that's caused is because we didn't clearly define and understand the initial request. If things go off track to begin with, then they are going to stay off track for the entire project. So how do we think about that very first request? And what do analytic translators do? Well, let's take this example. I worked with a client, and the CEO was trying to help a group decide whether or not we were going to invest in a new intervention. And the CEO said in a sweeping statement something like, in order to make this decision, we need to know how we're doing with the program that we're using right now. Now, before anybody else could jump in, the lead analyst said, sure, and the CEO walked out of the room. Well, unfortunately, 2 weeks later, after a lot of work was done and they presented the information back to the CEO, it turned out, as you might guess, that the comparison that they made was not the comparison the CEO had in mind. So they ended up feeling, the analysts felt like they had been misled about what was important. The CEO felt like they couldn't understand what it is that they need to do. So there was animosity between the two teams. What we can do as analytic translators is think about it as creating space. And what I mean by that is creating space in a conversation. Because the way things work right now in business, people go from meeting to meeting, people go from project to project, and it's not very frequent that we give people space. And the way an analytic translator does that is they slow down, they actually stay a little bit quiet, and they encourage, they prompt the other person to say more, either with head nods or eye contact or hand gestures. When we create space, it does a few different things. It helps us pay attention and notice when, for instance, there's a new idea or an unexpected result. Maybe we need to think about where this request is coming from. And when it's the first time you've heard it, it's likely the person hasn't thought it through yet. We might also listen for language that's very general. When someone says, oh, we need it to be better or higher or less costly or more effective. Have we thought about what we are comparing to? And if we haven't thought about it, let's try and get more clear. Analytic translators will also listen for jargon. And you know what these words are. It's data-driven, evidence-based, best-in-class, whatever kind of word that becomes the go-to word at your organization. When someone is using that jargon, they might mean something by it, and you might mean something by it. It isn't necessarily the same thing. So by giving somebody space, by pausing, slowing down, prompting them, it gives them room for their thoughts to crystallize. It gives us room to get a clearer picture of what the project is about. And it also allows them to get to what really matters about the project. And what I mean by that is that when someone is allowed to talk about a specific outcome or project, the rule of three is a way of understanding that the third thing that someone says is much more likely to be a clear picture than the first two things. So that's number two, create space. The third is how an analytic translator gathers information. So again, these are skills you don't necessarily see, but an analytic translator will encourage, not just through creating space, but through asking questions in a specific way. So let me illustrate. Imagine that you're in a meeting and you're reviewing an important project that's coming up in the future. I want you to consider the following questions. So imagine you're the one who's reviewing this new project, and I'm going to ask these questions. And what I want you to do is imagine what kind of answer is going to come out of your mouth. What kind of answer comes to mind? Well, have you already reviewed the agenda? Does this analytic design look okay? Do you have what you need? Does this list seem complete? Can you confirm that this is the most important objective? So if you're like me, you know that these questions are encouraging a very concise, probably yes or no affirmative answer. I call it begging for a yes. So when you do that, you are not prompting someone to think more clearly, to elaborate, and to get more understanding of what they believe is important about a project. On the other hand, imagine that same project and I ask you the following questions. See how this goes. So, as we think about this important project, I want to take an extra moment to consider any additional possibilities for how the analysis can help our business. So I'm curious about any thoughts you have. And then after I let you answer, I might say, wow, that's an important consideration. If we do that, how would that be useful? This kind of a preamble before a question up at the top is called framing. When I frame, I prepare your brain to answer a question. I give you a purpose. It's so that we can consider additional possibilities. I let you know that this is not a threatening question, that there's no right answer, that I will not be judging anything that you say by saying, gosh, I'm just curious. If I say, oh, That's an important consideration. And if we did do that, I am asking you to think to the future, again, with a frame. Analytic translators learn how to ask questions in a way that elicit a certain type of response. Instead of a direct, closed yes or no question, which restricts not only the type of answer, but the thoughtfulness of the answer, an analytic translator will provide an open-ended, well-framed question to invite them to contribute new thinking, and does it in a way that feels safe. And if you want to learn more about framing, it's in Get to What Matters. But we cover that also in Becoming an Analytic Translator. So in addition to how they gather information, what about how they share information? An analytic translator thinks very carefully about how information can be absorbed by the other person. And I like to remind my data, scientific, analytic audience that when we are giving information back to a business team, it is not the same as a research paper. Now, if you were trained in scientific method and you were trained as a research scientist, you know that you are given a very specific order that you deliver things. It focuses on what you as an analyst did. And then you go through the methods and all of the detail about the data and what kind of software you used. It's the technical findings, the coefficients, and how large they were. It's the limitations and statistical significance. And then finally, after your business colleagues have fallen asleep, you get to the actual conclusions. An analytic translator knows that that is the perfect way to deliver it to a scientific audience. But if we want to talk to our business colleagues, we focus on what matters to them, not what mattered to us. We build a narrative. We tell them a story. How did we start this in the first place? What is so important about it? How is what we found important to the business? And then we convert it into very specific business implications. And then we offer detail about methods and technical findings if somebody is interested. So we rearrange it in the exact opposite way as an analytic translator to make it easy for the business audience. So we prepare, we create space, we gather information in very unthreatening and open ways. We share information in ways that matter to the business. And lastly, we build allegiance. And what I mean by that is that we want each team to feel appreciated and appreciative of the other team. We do that by acknowledging the effort that has been made, by showing appreciation very specifically for the tasks that they have achieved or the output that they have created. We take accountability when things go wrong. We don't finger point, which happens a lot between these two teams. And we do this, of course, when things go well, because then it's easy. But an analytic translator also does it and focuses on accountability, appreciation, and acknowledgement, especially when things didn't go as well as they want. Because as we start to build trust over time and confidence in each other's work, that is what will go a long way when things possibly go wrong in the future. So this is the 5 things that analytic translators do that you don't see. They prepare in a certain way. They create space for the whole team. They gather information in a safe, inviting way. They share information in ways that make the most sense. And they do that while building allegiance between the teams. If you're just getting started, here's a couple things you can focus on. Slow down. Don't rush through the various steps in a project. Don't rush through conversations. Be deliberate about intention. What do you hope that people walk away with from this particular meeting? Prioritize collaboration between the teams. That is part of the job. It's not just getting things done, it's how people feel while it's happening. And really invest in learning new listening and communication skills. As a reminder, we do have a book, Become an Analytic Translator. And I've also recorded a course with 35 different modules. And I've recorded conversations between our business person, Lee, and our analytic team member, Anna, so that we can see when conversations go well and when conversations don't go as well. So again, I appreciate all of you joining me, and I will now take some questions. Thank you very much.